Welcome to our live stream today. We are talking about some powerful, surprising, significant data from all over the world. We have a randomized sampling from 140 countries, and we're seeing significant shifts in the world's emotional intelligence over these last few years. We've shared some of that data in 2021, and today we are breaking new data, never seen before, about what's happening in the state of the heart, the emotional intelligence levels around the world. And we have an incredible panel joining us today. I'm really honored to be able to bring these voices to you today on our live stream. I hope you will interact with us and share and ask questions. And I want to start by just showing you one finding, and then we will bring in our panel to discuss this. The first finding is that you can see that emotional intelligence globally has declined. Again, this is a randomized sample from 140 countries, balanced by gender, balanced by age, balanced by geographic region, and we're seeing this huge plummet during the start of the pandemic. But the decline is continuing in this late pandemic period, and maybe good news is that it's slowing down. That decline is slowing down. So when we think about emotional intelligence and how much we need it in this time, I'd like our panelists to share a little bit of perspective, introduce yourselves. What's one thing that you're seeing in the world right now? Richa, let's start with you.
Yes, firstly, thank you so much for having me here, Josh, and really excited to be here with all the wonderful panelists. My name is Richa. I'm from India. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO at Labhya. We are an India-based education nonprofit, and we run some of the world's largest programs on children's well-being and social emotional learning in India. We currently work with about 2.4 million children across 3 state governments. And our idea is to institutionalize children's well-being in public education systems. I also am here in the capacity of a young leader for the Sustainable Development Goals. I work directly with the Office of the UN Youth Envoy, and I'm one of the 17 young people who have been selected for a 2-year cohort to really advance the Sustainable Development Goals in our own capacities. Essentially, at heart, though, I'm a teacher turned entrepreneur, and I saw the graph, I saw the statistics, and I have been an educator for over 10 years now. And I can see how challenging it is for the world, and specifically in my experience for our children in terms of their emotional intelligence. Many of our children actually went through terrible and really difficult times during COVID, clubbed with this increased surge and overexposure to social media and technology, with very little regulation and with very little space to talk about the challenges of over engagement with the internet. And perhaps one of the reasons that there is this severe decline is that we didn't have enough time, especially our young people and children, to process what happened during COVID. We jumped straight into the world, or the new world, and then it's sort of just dissolved into some big chaos that we need to process together as a community.
Thank you. Sara, let's go to you. Please introduce yourself and what are you noticing in this first graph?
Thank you, Josh. Nice to meet you all. It's really a pleasure also for me to be here with you to share some perspectives from my own experience. I'm Sarakan, and I'm the team lead for career management and development at the World Health Organization, which is one of the specialized agencies of the United Nations that is based in Geneva, Switzerland. And our mandate is to serve the most vulnerable and to provide public health support to all countries globally, and we have been particularly active in during the pandemic. So my experience as a coach, I'm a coach and a career counselor, And my background is in organizational development and talent development. So my work really in WHO is to support the leaders and staff in learning, developing, and acquiring new skills, and growing talent in general. And my experience recently, specifically more recently, is related to the fact that I see a decline and an emotional shift in a decrease in trust, a decrease in trust of people towards the organization, towards leaders, towards governments, and this produces a kind of negative effect because people close up, they become more concentrated on themselves, they disengage, and this has a direct impact also on their ability to connect, to share information and experiences, and ultimately to provide empathy, to connect empathically with colleagues. And this has been my experience working with employees in the organization, but also hearing from other UN agencies who are based in Geneva, with whom we have a network and an exchange. So yes, this is my initial thoughts.
Thank you, Sara. Enahoro, let's go over to you.
Excited to be here. Thank you, Josh and everybody. I lead a team at Post Factory. Post Factory is an emotional intelligence-based management consulting company, and we particularly help organizations transform by helping them aligning their emotions and their performance. So we believe that transformation would happen if you have a good alignment between what you feel and what you do. And we're largely based in Africa and Nigeria particularly. And what I have noticed over the period of time between COVID and now is the fact that in this part of the world, people are trying to survive and looking for the best outcome for life. And what we are grappling with right now is a lot of employees. I mean, I work a lot with organizations, so a lot of employees are moving countries, and that's because the trust and the confidence that they have in the leadership of countries in Africa is reducing continuously. And so a lot of organizations are actually struggling, to find their feet with managing talent and keeping talent. So there's a lot of changes in decision continuously just to keep the talent. We just finished the Africa Emotional Intelligence Conference, Josh, and we were talking about thriving in a migrating world, because and that's particular because one of the most important things going on in Nigeria, West Africa right now, is that people are migrating. People are moving to Canada, moving to UK. People are not moving with all the resources that are required. So people are moving and they are in debt in Nigeria while they're moving. And so even though there's the excitement of moving, there's also the fear, the sadness of, I have moved, but I'm not happy. And so we're hearing that those who have moved are not particularly excited, and those who are here are not particularly also excited. So there's a lot of fear in the midst. That's affecting organization big time, because we have to then begin to engage flexibility and adaptability in ways that we have never done before. Some organizations are beginning to change the idea of training, because they know that if they spend money right now, if anybody comes in, the person might be gone in the next minute. So all of that dynamics is really affecting how people feel, how people go to work, how people engage at work, who to trust at work, how to spend at work. And it's a lot of work for organizations and for leadership in organization, as well for the employees too. So it's a huge mix. And I'm not surprised to see how emotional intelligence is doing in the world. But I'm excited about something in the data I'll share as we go ahead. Thank you.
Wow, folks, this is really depressing. We're in this incredible level of chaos and complexity, and people are struggling in so many different spaces and so many different kinds of organizational contexts. And and we're seeing it all over the world. And I think there's a part of me that's like, can't we just go back to normal? Right? And like, I don't want to, like, it's been a hard 3 years. And now we're going to have all this other hard stuff.
Yeah. It's a lot of work, actually. It is.
Yeah.
We've always known that change is difficult, but we've probably never had imagined that to take the whole world, to manage change at this level. Yeah.
Well, and Sara, I remember we did a special conference for World Health Organization employees a couple of years ago in kind of height of pandemic, and people were so, working so hard in your organization in so many places, and just so much outpouring of energy.
Yes, and it's true, and that was a turning point in our, let's say, organization when we did that conference, because then I was able really to introduce formally emotional intelligence through different events and activities. And in fact, I see that a recurrent pattern is that our staff are really exposed, and they were particularly exposed during the pandemic, and to work very hard. Their workloads increased hugely, and also they are more and more asked to do more work with less resources, and this creates a sort of tension, and also stress and risk of burnout. So we had a lot of cases of people really giving their best and working long hours, epidemiologists, but also admin support staff, public health experts on the grounds, and now they are sort of recovering from this, but still living through the effects of those huge workloads, and it doesn't seem to change, in fact. So this is something that we are confronted with. And also another challenge that I can see where emotional intelligence would be really important is the fact that people find it difficult to reconnect after a long time of working remotely, and we have also the dimension of being global and working geographically in different places. So that's why we are really working on connecting people now, or reconnecting in a different way through emotional intelligence.
I think the word reconnecting is disconnection and reconnection. Maybe a theme of our conversation. Richa, in your work, you mentioned this, like, there's been all this turbulence and trauma. I mean, it's not just turbulence; it's more than that people have been grappling with. And then we're like, go here, no, go here, go online, go offline, be in school, be out of school. So if you think about the skills of emotional intelligence and social emotional learning, if you could wave your magic wand and you could say, okay, all of our educators and kids and families, this is one skill that I would like to see people have more of right now, what would be your one emotional intelligence skill?
Thank you so much, Josh. And firstly, I must say I deeply relate to what Enahoro and Sara said about how people across the world have responded to this, not decline, but this common collective sort of struggle that we all are having post COVID. I think, yes, from your question, I don't think there is one easy answer to this. I feel like we need more of everything now. Specifically, our children and young people need more of all the skills. But I think if I really had to choose, it would be relationship building skills. I truly feel that at this point, not just for children and young people, but specifically for educators and parents who have gone through so much, right? During COVID, our public school teachers, not just in India, but across the world, doubled up as community workers. They went, distributed ration, they tracked down children, they tracked where they were, they supplied devices wherever required, they made sure that children were learning in some way or the other. And when schools opened, they had to switch everything back to normal, right? And so in our work, we tried to work with these teachers to ensure that there was a transition period between online and offline, or no school at all, to now suddenly coming to school. We had these second and third graders who were technically in second and third grade, but they had never sat in a classroom for 6 hours. And
Mm.
so amongst all of that, what genuinely held everyone together in those really vulnerable moments when children would come to school feeling very confused and scared, with masks on or mask off, where teachers were concerned, the one thing that kind of tied everyone together was that I'm here for you. I'm here for
Mm.
you. It's confusing, but I will take care of you to the best of my abilities. And both ways, between peers and also between teachers and students. So I feel at this point, perhaps just that skill of holding another person, and the best that I can articulate it is relationship building skills, would be the most important.
Well, and connected to that, I see Matt in the US is sharing empathy, which
Yes.
is certainly going to help with that. Salafa from Saudi, great to see you here, Salafa. Optimism, which is Salafa's favorite emotional intelligence competency. We have a video about that, and emotional insight. And Sangeeta, I think this is important, is that this more work with less resources and the burnout piece. So I'm going to show you one more piece of data. This is, again, from our new research that we haven't shared yet with anyone. We have 8 competencies of emotional intelligence in our model at 6 seconds. This is what we measure that drives this state-of-the-heart research. And you can see the changes from 2018 to 2022. So we see drops in all 8 emotional intelligence competencies. And if we look just at the 2022 line, what we see is, if we imagine this as one person, we have a person who's got, a little struggle with tuning into emotions, but maybe more capacity for recognizing their own behaviors. There's a lot of consequential thinking, a lot of stopping and saying, wait a minute, there's a risk, what's wrong? But then having a very hard time navigating the emotions, feeling really stuck in emotions. Some intrinsic motivation, but having lost a lot of intrinsic motivation. Some optimism, but having lost a lot of optimism. Some empathy, feeling of connection, lost a little bit, and then sense of purpose, sense that I can put my purpose into action today. Kind of in the middle of the pack here, but again, having lost a lot. And I'm wondering if, Enahoro, maybe we could start with you. What's just one of these competencies where you look at this change and it really strikes you as important or challenging or significant? Which one strikes you?
George, so when we use a 6-second model, it's usually beautiful when we combine one competency and the other. And when I look at the strength of the applied consequential thinking with the decrease in navigate, it's threatening. When people then get to a place where they are weighing and weighing and weighing, for the first time, the phrase analysis paralysis becomes more clear and more visible. Like I was looking at the data and I was imagining people analyzing and paralyzed, and they are stuck, not being able to move. Now that's like practical paralysis, in our day-to-day life. So much thinking going on. Should I not? What is the cost? What is the benefit? Which one should I? And in the middle of that, doing nothing. stuck in emotions and not moving. It paints a very, very terrible picture, and it's almost scary for the world because people should be able to move on, move on. One of the most beautiful, again, emotions, mote, the root word for emotion is mot, right? Which is drive. I mean, the beauty of emotions at the end of the day should be to move, to do something, to drive. Maybe it would have been better to be doing something and then realizing your mistake and then redoing it and then getting it and then moving forward. But to be stuck in emotions and stuck in analysis paralysis, it means that people are either doing nothing or just doing whatever they see to do. And it pains so much because we have these skills and they're learnable, they're measurable, and they can be used. So it puts a lot of work on all of us here to say we need to push this out more and more and more. I wish optimism can continue to hold through. Josh, you remember the video you did during the pandemic on optimism, and you said that it is a force multiplier in that video, and that's probably one of the best definition of optimism I ever heard. In terms of all you said in that video, and I wish that people can use that to remove themselves from this very low navigate. I mean, I think navigate declined the most, from all that I'm saying here, and it's not interesting. It's not good for the world.
I'm going to go to Sara just 1 second. I'll share Salafa's comment, which kind of echoes this, questioning everything in this difficult time. And with all of this questioning, can we move forward? Can we solve this? What is the risk? We've been hearing so many risks. Sara, what's one of these stories that's leaping out to you?
For me, also the ability to navigate emotions is really key because I find that people are still drawn back by their fears and fear of taking risks, fear of reaching out, fear of making decisions, and so all of this is like having an impact on the level of engagement and also the collaboration. So what we are working on with also large teams and leaders is really through coaching and also career counseling, bringing back this perspective of opening up maybe possibilities and really supporting staff to deal with these fears, with these concerns, with this worrying, which are still very much present, unfortunately. And for me, is also fear is an obstacle to innovation. And we need a lot of innovation in today's world with all the changes that are taking place. We need to be able to come up with new solutions. And if you are locked in and if you are taken back by your fear, by your concerns, worrying, but also by your not being well mentally and psychosocially well, you cannot really engage with others to innovate. And another aspect that I see is that innovation only comes through teamwork. For me, it's part of an exchange. So I see it very important as emotional intelligence practitioners to stimulate this sort of networking among people so that they can really exchange ideas and start really working through their own feelings just by sharing and just maybe also by being together. So this is something that we are concentrating on in the World Health Organization, not just on mental health, but also on networking and team building.
Got a
Yes.
thumbs up for you, Sara. And I want to just take this comment from Bongi about purpose. So noble goals, that sense that I have a purpose and that I can live that purpose. I can, it's such a cliche quote, but it's so powerful. I can be the change that I wish to see. Gandhi. Richa, what is the antidote to the fear and overwhelm? The fear Sara talked about, the overwhelm Enahoro talked about. What do we do?
Thank you, Josh. And
Easy question for you.
so easy. But you quoted Gandhi, so I was coincidentally thinking about a quote, right? My observation from the data was that the one thing that we see all across is that all our competencies, all the emotional intelligence competencies are so deeply interconnected, right? So we can't see them in isolation. And they're all deeply connected to one quote by Gandhi that he once said, not words, but actions express priorities. And so how can we move from, like Enahoro was saying, how to move from this analysis paralysis to action orientation is the journey that we need to take. I think, in my experience of working with children and young people, specifically during COVID, what I saw was there was so much risk that actually it was young people who took risk and went out of their homes, took all the precautions, of course, but made sure that their community had the right information at the right time, had the right kind of resources to access. There were so many youth-led initiatives within India, and now I know across the world, where young people really stepped up and said, we need to do something on our own because we don't see anyone else doing it, right? And it ranged from anywhere sending right information on WhatsApp to people in their communities in the local language, addressing their fears, which may or may not have been, necessary, and also to the level of, working with government and working with policy to make sure that, young people and children were safe during COVID. I think so. The first thing is that while the data is sad, at the same time, one of the demographics that is very rarely studied for its action orientation is young people, because they are not seen as decision makers in a lot of spaces, right? But COVID taught us, in the last couple of years, taught us that young people can actually take charge. They are serious about the change we want to see, and so much more can be done if we harness that power and our potential. So that would be my first thought in terms of what could be a potential antidote to this.
Well, and the young leaders for the SDGs is such an incredible example of younger people, and many of you working with even younger people, and creating change. So thank you for your work in that space as well. I want to talk about energy. Kathleen Hogan, the chief people officer for Microsoft, recently wrote an article that we are in a global human energy crisis. We've been using the term emotional recession. And burnout, a couple of you have mentioned, and this just sense of stuckness that Enahoro talked about. And can we move? That takes energy.
Yeah.
And if we're in this human energy crisis, so I want to just share with you what may be driving the human energy crisis. And I think this is particularly, I see a couple of comments. People are talking about motivation and optimism. People are talking about what we do in corporations. This, to me, is of profound importance as we think about this human energy crisis and what might be driving burnout. And so these three competencies that you see just plummeted from 20 to 21. It wasn't, they went down, everything went down in the first year of the pandemic, but then they plummeted. And these three, exercising optimism, which is about that force multiplier, about seeing possibilities, that was Colin Powell called it a force multiplier. Pursue noble goals, that sense of purpose, and engaging intrinsic motivation, engaging it. It's there, we believe, I believe, we all have it inside us. But how do we engage it? So you see this, like it went down in 2020, and then from 2020 to 21, it just fell off a cliff. And these three emotional intelligence competencies, we call them the drive strand. And Sara, maybe you could comment on this. What are you seeing here as you look at this just massive decline in these three crucial competencies?
Yes, for me, is a bit of the result of the fact that people during the pandemic, they really closed up and they focused on themselves, and so they weren't able really probably to connect with something bigger, and because they didn't have the energy, they were just using their energies to survive, and this is something that happens when we are in survival mode. And
Mm,
probably we don't realize that we tend to isolate and to disconnect also from what really motivates us, and what we don't have that energy, as you were saying,
mm,
to engage, to collaborate. But hopefully there is an upward trend which is slightly improving. And for me, this has to do with the well-being, with in general. So you are well if you are able also to engage, to give your best in the workplace, to connect with something that has value to you. And in WHO we have that luxury, or that great great noble goal. So I think that we are privileged in the sense that we can work for the most vulnerable and believe in it, and I see many people that connect with that public health mission. So I think that as professionals, we need to be, as our colleagues were saying, the role models, and really displaying our energy, our belief in emotional intelligence, in reaching out, in really supporting our colleagues who are in this probably isolated and burn out mood. And we can do that by maybe introducing new tools, new policies. For example, WHO has really focused in the last 5 years on mental health, and we issued mental health guidelines at work. And also we focused on the special initiatives for mental health by raising awareness in staff members, in managers, about literacy on mental health and well-being, and then providing also opportunities for staff to meet with experts who were coming in and discuss. So I see all this also as an opportunity for us, for our organizations, to speak more about well-being and mental health. And I think this is something that can only probably put the curve up, help the curve go up
mm.
by this raising awareness, literacy, training also.
So we see some good news in this graph, right? It did start to come up. We'll come back to that in a second. Although even with that good news, the latest data is pretty low.
Yes.
Yeah.
I wanted to share this comment from Matt, the point about action, and I think this links to this theme. Like, what do we do, and when we find a way to actually take action, something shifts in us. And I want to go back to Richa's very early comment about, did we have time to really talk about it? Did we have time to grieve? And I think, Sangeeta, this point of like actually feeling the feelings. And I wonder if now in this space that we're in, I hesitate to say post-pandemic because I think it's I don't know that we're there yet, but
Whatever post yet.
I believe the WHO says, like, officially post-pandemic, but we still seem to be very much in this. But maybe in this phase, and Salafa pointed out, there's not just a pandemic of coronavirus. There's a lot of other pieces that came to light in this period. I wonder about this piece about, do we have time to feel? Enahoro, you talked about kind of the reactivity that you're seeing. You run multiple companies. You're very entrepreneurial. And as you think about all over Africa in particular, the people that you're working with, are people able to take time to actually feel?
No, and the answer is no. The answer is no. Reflection, again, one of our very, very important brain styles. Reflection is very, very underutilized. And because people have to eat the next meal, people have to make the next money, people have to pay the next bill. So there's really no enough time to sit and reflect. Africa, particularly, we're not used to, taking time to chill and going for holidays and, going on leave, things like that. It's not particularly predominant in this part of the world. So yes, no, we didn't have time to think, because it seemed like if you stop to think, you would die. You would not be able to eat, you would not be able to drink. And what I took away from that slide is this, Josh. You know how we say it in 6 seconds when we say that emotions makes you focus on the present, but emotional intelligence helps you to see the big picture, or helps you to see the vision, or helps you to see where you want to go. What I've learned from this graph that you just showed is that the world moves with the current of with the current of events. And when you begin to practice emotional intelligence, you are not supposed to be moving with the current of events. When events happen, you're supposed to take a pause, which is why we're called pause factory. And then you take a pause, and then you look at the situation, and then you begin to make decisions. So you pause, and then you think, and then you act. So emotions. What I've seen with this graph, with this particular slide, is that the world would continue, or the world continues to move at the currents or the frequency of events, which is purely against the practice of emotional intelligence, and just reminds us of the fact that people have to learn, this practice of EQ. If the events are beating us, like pandemic, I just heard that Zoom says people should come back to work 20% of the time. And now that those are the kind of actions we're talking about. So people are beginning to say, you know what, we need to act. We need to act. But that has happened like 3 years after. Maybe if people learn emotional intelligence continuously, when the event is going this way, we would be able to take a pause and say, wait a minute, this is what the event is saying. Rather than emotions focusing on the event alone, can we take a pause and look at the options, which people are beginning to look at 3 years after? So it's something I'm going to build on to say, guys, the world moves at the frequency of events, but emotional intelligence says don't move at the frequency of events. When events happen,
move at the frequency of purpose.
Of purpose, exactly, of purpose.
And Terry agrees with you. And Terry, I don't think we need to start with 90 seconds. I think we need to start with 6, but that's okay. And this piece about reflection. And a couple of you talked about this. Like, are we connected with each other? But are we even connected with ourselves and the land where we're standing? I want to go to another piece of data, which is very concerning. And Sara, I think you are seeing, I know we're all seeing this, but Sara, let's start with you on this. We're seeing in our emotional intelligence assessment, we measure key outcomes. as well as emotional intelligence. And sorry, this is not the slide I wanted to share you. This is the slide I wanted to share with you. Effectiveness, quality of life, relationships, and well-being. And those are all correlated with emotional intelligence. But we see in this one, the one that has declined the most or dropped, the one that's the lowest now, it hasn't declined the most, but the one that's the lowest is well-being. And given what we've been talking about, it's harder to do all of this reflecting and connecting when our well-being is compromised. Sara, what do you make of that?
Yes, and in fact, that's why I was mentioning the work of WHO in providing support to countries and in general governments on well-being and mental health strictly related to well-being. And this has to do with, as I was saying, increasing literacy about the topic, making leaders aware of the consequences of certain decisions on their people, but also providing trainings to health workers for them to become also aware of the consequences of burnout, for example, and the risks on their health. So all of this has been, I think, very much high on the radar of WHO, and we are, I think, responsible for providing this type of data, information, and well-being. I see is really correlated to really having a sense of purpose in life. It's not just being well in your physical well-being. It's also mentally is being connected with your sense of purpose of the why you are doing. What is the sense of all of this? So on the one hand, yes, there's the need for science and support in terms of guidelines, mental health. But on the other hand, I think practically we can, I think we can support people to become more optimist, to exercise more optimism by connecting with what is really important to them in life.
I think that we also have this challenge of, as people who are supporting other people, and for WHO employees, and I know, Sara, your work is very much about equipping and supporting people who support others. And there's a lot of extra exhaustion. And Richa, you talked about this too. Richa, in the context of educators, in North America, I'm seeing really concerning data about educator well-being. So as you look at this this statistic, whoops, I clicked the wrong button. As you look at this statistic, Richa, about well-being, what comes up for you in terms of your work with educators?
I think three things come up, and this has been our learning from last year to this year. Last year, when we finally opened up most of our public schools to children once again, after a lot of on and off discussion and debate around what would be the best way to transition children offline into schools from wherever they were, right? I think the three thoughts here. First, I can totally understand where this data is coming from. I've been speaking with multiple teachers, and we've been in all of these capacity building workshops across India in the work that we do. And while I don't think there is any specific data in India on teacher well-being, the one thing that is very apparent to me is that our teachers genuinely need much more empathy and structural spaces in their day to process what has happened and also their regular days, right? One way that we are able to do that at Labhya is in our daily well-being class, which happens across all the public schools that we work with. The one practice that we try to enable is teachers sharing their reflections first and then children sharing them. So if we're sharing about gratitude or how are you feeling today or what are you struggling with, the teacher has that safe space equal enough as children to share how they are feeling, and it also encourages children to share back. So that's one, having structural specific timings and parts of the days that teachers have to really process what has been happening. The second is really reimagining what capacity building looks like, right? Sorry, historically in India, teacher training is the word that we use. I'm so sorry.
No worries.
Um, and Thank you. I think what these spaces, these workshops that we do with teachers every quarter, every 6 months, should be less about skill building and more about purpose finding and more about building a community of educators from all these different schools in the same vicinity and sharing what are their struggles and what are they doing to overcome their struggles and become more resilient. So in our work, we've tried to dedicate like a few minutes or 1/4 of our training time to this, where teachers come together and just share what is going on. I think the third layer to this that I have to bring up is gender, right? So many of our teachers are female, and during the pandemic, they were, because of how gender roles work, they were expected to not only do all the online work that, by the way, they were doing for the first time, setting up Zoom accounts for the first time, teaching children, making presentations, all for the first time, making content for WhatsApp, but were also expected to do household chores because that's what the gender roles prescribe. And all this invisible labor burnt them out even more, and there was no space to address that as well. And so it has to be looked at from a very intersectional lens as we move towards solution finding here.
Yeah, so as you bring that up, I want to mention in the United States, some of the data that I've been seeing is that Black, Latine, Indigenous, people of Asian descent, educator well-being is dramatically more challenged and more compromised. And so as we bring this intersectional lens, realizing that systems of inequity
Yes.
create inequity. I mean, that's what it means, right? And so the impacts are greater on people who are more marginalized, and whether
Yes.
they're globally marginalized or marginalized within one country, when you're pushed out from the center, you have less supports. That's what it means.
Yes.
So I think that as we think about the sort of intersection here of health, well-being, it's not just about our physical health, as Sara said, it's also about our psychological health, but it's also about our social health and our sense of connectedness and our sense of community. And I wonder if that's one of the reasons why we are seeing more and more effects of this well-being issues the younger you are. And so the last piece of data that I'm going to share with you for today is this finding, which is, again, that drive strand, that combination of exercising optimism, of intrinsic motivation, of pursuable goals. It went down, remember, but it went down unequally based on age. And as you can see here, the younger you are, the more impacted you were in these last years. And for Gen Z, there's been this really brutal effect on drive. And I think this is particularly concerning when we think who kind of in the history of the world are the people who are out there saying, yes, let's be optimistic. Yes, let's try something new. Yes, we can do it. And that's the same group that's been most damaged emotionally in terms of their emotional intelligence in this period. Who has a thought?
Oh my God. So
Yeah.
I think that the idea behind this would come from a lot of things. And I like when you looked at the dual nature of this data. I mean, the duality of this data. The Gen Zs are the ones they want freedom. They want to go out there and get things done. They're challenging the status quo. Um, all of that really would be putting pressure on them, right? They grew up after the global financial crisis. They've grown up in times of technology. There's a lot of high expectation of people. The average home that got a Gen Z, you would see the parents now depending on the Gen Zs to come up with creative thoughts, with creative ideas, and they say to them, "You are the ones that understand the technology. You are the ones that understand how to do things." And that's not just in the home, even in the offices and in the corporates. I mean, there's a lot of dependence, quote and unquote, on Gen Zs to do new things, and to get us on TikTok and get us on social media. And I don't know if it's in other part of the world. In this part of the world, there's this awareness of mental health with the Gen Zs. And that awareness, rather than help them, it's helping them to see the fact that they are having, mental well-being issues. You understand the idea around um, what's this? Okay, so it just keep my mind now where what you continue to think continues to happen around you, and how the brain rewires itself based on your thoughts. Um, uh, we talked about that a lot, Josh, in 6 seconds. If it comes to mind, I'll say it again. But so the thoughts of mental health and well-being, and you hear the phrase, "Oh, my mental health, oh, it's affecting my mental health." You hear it with the Gen Z's more. So that awareness, it's actually not an awareness of solution. It's an awareness of, this is what's wrong with me, and there's more of that in the world, and there's more of that in the world. So I'm not surprised to see that the older you are, the more you're more the more capacity you have to manage this world that we are in, and the younger you are, the less capacity that you have to manage these. And that's to tell the fact that what we go through in life builds resilience eventually. You know, Somehow, one way or the other, what we experience in life, you know, builds a form of resilience. So the more of life you see, the more understanding, the more awareness you have, and the more you have options. In Africa, we have, or in Nigeria, we have a proverb that says that the young person can have more clothes than the elderly one, but can never have more rags than the elderly one. What that means is that you can have a lot of clothes, but the elderly one has used a lot of clothes and have more rags in their house because they're not using them anymore. It means that they've experienced a lot of clothes in their lifetime, and that's what's here. You can have a lot of ideas and have a lot of excitement about the world, but you cannot have so much experience like the ones that have gone ahead of you. And that's what I see here. There's so much responsibility they've placed on themselves, so much changes happening. The definition of work has changed in their time. The definition of responsibility has changed in their time. And that's what I'm saying. I think that, yes, we're doing a lot of things around this already everywhere in the world. And that's why we're here. I hope that the more that we're doing would help them to grow. There's another generation after them. We're not talking about those guys yet, but oh,
Richard, let's go to you on this topic of Gen Z and this struggle. What do you make of this graph, Richa?
I think three things come to mind, Josh. The first is that from a young person's perspective, and just for context, right, there's more than 1.8 billion young people in the world right now, which is below the age of 30, of which most young people are either marginalized or face something called as an experience multidimensional poverty, right? Which means that they experience not only financial distress, but also inequities, but also shame, but also the threat of violence and insufficient living conditions. And so all of that combined with a global pandemic, which we had no idea about, which we didn't know a lot about in the beginning of a few months, led to a lot of short-term thinking and led to a lot of sort of freeze sort of mode. And what that has done is, and there are multiple studies around this, that when you experience this kind of adversity and severe adversity, young people tend to only make decisions in the short term, right? They're not able to think long term. They're not able to think, what will I become 5 or 10 years from now? How will my career be? What is my purpose? It's mostly about, how can I be safe right now? How can I be not exposed to this kind of violence or this adversity tomorrow, right? What is my next meal looking like? When am I meeting my friends next? When will I feel safe next? And so, with all of these questions, it is inevitable that the graphs went down because, firstly, there was no social safety net, there was no awareness for young people to be able to feel reassured, because adults were also feeling the same uncertainty in life. But more importantly, Josh, most of our young people who were going through multidimensional poverty also saw the adults in their lives suffering, right? They saw their parents going back into debt traps, which they are now paying off. They saw parents migrating from big cities back to villages because they couldn't afford to live in these big cities, not on a daily wage, and go back to farming. And and they face this huge sort of difference when you grow up in a big city, but you are from a different economic background versus going to a very different setup in a rural area, right? No matter how big your family is back then. The second thing that I would like to share is that there are no spaces for young people even today. Like, we all run programs with young people on this call, but even then, the mass of young people who are vulnerable don't have a dedicated program in school that prepared them with the right kind of toolkit to deal with such an uncertainty, right? How do you fall? What kind of people we should fall back on in such situations? How do you regulate yourself when you feel fear? How do you think long term when all the information resources around you are telling you to think short term? And then thirdly, there is definitely overexposure to all this information around mental health and COVID and all the other things happening in the world, with no proper toolkit to process the information to see if it's contextual to us or not, right? So I'll pause there, but I feel like these were my three major thoughts looking at this.
We are unfortunately just about out of time. So, Sara, let's get the last word from you. What's your takeaway from this conversation? Where are you? Where are you? Where's your heart and head at now?
So what I take away is really the importance of introducing and facilitating change by being ourselves role models, and also working towards maybe developing new policies, trainings, and tools like we are all doing, really to engage people, to engage colleagues and individuals with whom we work. And another takeaway is really the fact that emotional intelligence can be the answer, one of the answers to increase collaboration. And in today's world, given the complexities that we are facing, we cannot face these complexities alone. We need collaboration, we need teamwork. So emotional intelligence for me is one of the answers to creating this sense of collaboration and exchange and partnership, which is key to our work. So this is my takeaway. And perhaps the last one is really the need to exercise optimism, and to be ourselves really uh, role models in this, to spread this optimism.
Well, despite all this bad news, I will say I am actually very optimistic. I see that while there are these tremendous social and emotional challenges that we're grappling with, we have people like our panelists today. Thank you so much. And all of those participating in the chat and our network all over the world. And you may have noticed in the chat, people checking in from dozen countries all over the world. People are recognizing we can develop these skills. And we have the data to prove it. These skills are learnable and they're correlated with essential outcomes for us in our personal lives, in our schools, in our businesses, in our government agencies. And we've been doing this for 25 years at 6 Seconds. And never in this time have we had the readiness and the awareness and the participation and the recognition that this is what's needed now. We just had a meeting at the United Nations last week, and the person we were talking to said, I can't think of a single thing that we need more right now than emotional intelligence. It's time. So those of you who've been here listening, panelists, thank you so much. Look forward to continuing this conversation. We've put the link in the chat to some of this data. We're going to continue to share the state of the heart data throughout the rest of this year. The report will be coming out soon. You can sign up to get the report the day it's released by going to the link in the chat, and we'll continue to talk about this and continue to work on growing these skills, starting with ourselves. Thank you all for being here. Panelists, stay for a second, and audience, thank you. We'll see you soon.